Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Steele, and the CEO of Dirigo Food Safety, and I am coming to you today from sitting in front of my fireplace here in Maine. We're having a crazy, crazy snowstorm. Hopefully it's going to be like the last one of the season. And I figured because like all of my appointments got canceled for the afternoon because I can't get down the driveway, I would come to you and I would talk to you about trichinella. We've had a couple of discussions on the page around trichinellosis and when it occurs, who's at risk, how you're at risk, all that sort of stuff. So what I thought I would do in this Facebook Live, which will also be recorded for posterity and reposting and all that jazz, is have a Q&A. We're just going to be here for a half hour. Talking about trichinella and how it affects producers and processors in the pork industry. So again, I'm Dr. Michelle Steele. I'm the CEO of Dirigo Food Safety, and if you don't know this, I'm actually a veterinarian. That's why I'm doctor, and I came to this food safety work through the U.S. Army. So I'm a veterinarian, and I work with producers and processors in all bunches of different foods. But because I am a veterinarian by training, I do an awful lot with on-farm production and people doing USDA production from animals that they own. That was my very first client, actually, built a on-farm processing plant. So let's talk. Let's get into the nitty-gritty and talk trichinella. So trichinella is a nematode. Okay, nematode is a kind of worm. Trichinella infects pigs, rodents, and walruses and bears. Okay, and there's a whole life cycle. In one of the threads, I referred to the life cycle of trichinella, and it requires a rodent host. And so what basically happens is that trichinella is transmitted when a infected rodent crawls into the grain bin and dies, and then the pig eats the dead rodent that has the infective stage of the larvae. Okay, again, it's a nematode, it's a worm. And then the pig gets infected. All right. Anytime a pig or a walrus or a bear eats infected rodents or other mammals that might have trichinella, they can then become a host for the trichinella. If we then eat the pig, the walrus, or the bear, we can become infected with trichinella. We are what's called a dead-end host. Trichinella cannot replicate in us. It can make us very, very sick nonetheless. All right, but we're a dead-end host. So the life cycle of trichinella out in what we call the sylvatic system, which is out in the wild, is one of rodents. Okay, feral hogs can also infect other feral hogs. You know, anybody who's had a pig know that mamas eat babies, and so that's another way the life cycle is perpetuated. Bears have it out in the wild because they can also eat rodents. You know, protein is protein. And I did some research, and I cannot figure out where walruses come into this picture, but I know that they do. So with any luck, we won't find out that there's some sort of fish species there that we now have to worry about trichinella, because that's the last thing the FDA needs to think about in fisheries HACCP. Okay, so that's kind of the life cycle around trichinella. We're going to be focusing on pigs here. This is, after all, the salt-cured pig, and I'm kind of hoping that we've got some producers and processors on here. I want to encourage you to write questions in the comment box. I will get to them as I can, and then when and then there are some questions that have kind of come up in the threads that I will address. Okay, so. So in hogs, the USDA worries a lot during processing about trichinella. But the truth is that you can do little to interrupt the trichinella life cycle at processing, besides the things that the USDA tells you, cooking, freezing, or curing it. And so it's incredibly important for us to be having that conversation back on the farm. Anybody who's worked with me for any length of time knows that food safety starts on the farm. Okay, that's the first thing. Food safety starts on the farm. And then the second thing is you miss more by not looking than by not knowing. Okay, if you don't know that your pigs should not be cohabitating with rodents, they should not be cohabitating with rodents for a whole lot of reasons, not just trichinosis. Okay, salmonella. Salmonella, rodents carry salmonella. They carry salmonella in their feces. It's a GI bug. Trichinella lives in the mussels, of course. And so if you have a rodent problem on your farm, you have multiple problems and multiple risk factors for multiple pathogens at processing that then have to be taken care of, okay? I would also say that if you have rodents on your farm and you're grain feeding, that's an incredibly expensive proposition. Good grain hygiene is like the key, one of the significant keys to profitability. Okay, and so that brings us to a discussion of what does it mean to reduce the incidence of Trichinella back on the farm, on-farm food safety. Well, there are a couple of really key points to on-farm food safety with pigs. All right, number one, this is the most important thing. If you take nothing else away from this, understand this. Sorry, it's a snow day. That's my German Shepherd. Do not feed garbage to your pigs, okay? Meat waste scraps is how Trichinella, by and large, has gotten into our pig food stream, all right? The USDA is incredibly concerned about this. There are laws in all 50 states about cooking garbage. The garbage cooking generally means you have to prove that you are using a garbage cooker that is certified by your state and you are cooking to 212 degrees for at least an hour. Okay, that's a garbage cooker. Do not feed restaurant slop to your pigs. The people I know that have backyard pigs, I do not recommend feeding any meat scraps whatsoever to your pigs. Even from your own home. Yes, it's legal in many states to do that. That does not make it a good idea. Okay, so we need to understand garbage feeding has got to go. If you look at the Facebook pages around pasturing pigs and that sort of thing, responsible owners and responsible pig growers need to call out other people when they talk about slopping pigs with restaurant waste. That's not okay, and we as a community need to stop that. Okay, I call it out when I can, but nobody wants to listen to me because I'm working for the man or something like that. Okay, but truly I am here to make sustainable food systems, and one of those things is to have safe on-farm food practices. So for the people who are doing it right, Greg Gunthorpe, I am talking to you. Thank you for preaching about how to do it right, because it makes a really, really big difference in the world. So, all right, so that's the first thing. Let's make it socially unacceptable to garbage feed. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is grain hygiene. All right, grain hygiene, which I alluded to a little bit ago, is the idea that we keep rodents out of our grain, all right? Grain hygiene starts with buying grain from people you know and trust. I don't know actually if people know this, but a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, we had the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, PEDV. Well, that came in on organic grain through the Detroit port from China, because we don't grow enough organic grain for ourselves here. Okay, it was the most costly animal disease outbreak we've ever seen in the entire world, PEDV. I know farmers who lost entire croplets of piglets, and it was completely devastating. You have to understand who and where your food is coming from. Okay, you have to understand how they do grain hygiene, because you don't want to buy rodents in with your grain, and you don't want to buy rodent feces in with your grain. Okay, there are whole other sets of things as well, okay? And there's this new rule under the Food Safety Modernization Act called the Animal Feeds Rule, where feed mills and grain mills and people providing animal feeds are actually having to do food safety planning so that you, the farmer, are not buying in problems, okay? And there are problems with pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, that sort of thing. And then in pig feed, we worry a lot about molds, that sort of thing. If you see, there's a little veterinary medicine, if you see bluish and reddish ears and red and mottled vulvas, that can be a sign of mold toxicity in your food, okay? So grain hygiene starts when you're buying the grain. Okay, grain hygiene continues on your farm. When you get grain, do not dump it on the barn floor because then you're feeding your rodent population. And no, cats are not an organic method of pest control. Okay, so you got to keep the cats away from the pigs as well for other reasons like toxoplasmosis. Okay, so now we're going to get the grain in onto the farm, and the grain's going to go into grain bins. These do not have to be fancy grain bins, but they do have to be rodent proof. I highly recommend getting those big ones. Those. I mean, you don't have to buy a grain silo, but there are, I think, $1,200 to $1,500 at the Tractor Supply, a grain bin that you can put your wheelbarrow under, dump the grain in, go feed the pigs, and get on with your life. All right, those things keep rodents out. Okay, you have to have rodent traps around silos if you have them. Okay, and you have to get rid of the rodents. All right, and so then the next thing is when you're actually feeding the pigs, cannot fall in and asphyxiate on the grain. That's what happens, is that if you have this huge grain tub and you're feeding a whole bunch of pigs and that grain sits out there, that's bad for a number of reasons, not the least which it's going to get wet and moldy, and that's an expensive way to feed your pigs. But if it's not covered, rodents can fall in, they asphyxiate, and then pigs are omnivorous. They don't care what they're eating, they'll eat anything. It is surpassingly rare for field mouse to go up and die in a field and a pig will eat them. Does it happen? Probably. I have definitely heard stories of pigs hunting mice. I'm not sure how successful they are, though. Okay, so those are the major things that we do back on the farm. We don't feed garbage, and we practice good grain hygiene. And we practice, frankly, good pest control, which is important for a whole lot of disease processes. Okay, so I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions. We're about halfway through. And then I'm going to move on to processing. Okay, so it doesn't look like anybody has any questions. Again, there's a comments button down there. This is being recorded and I'll repost it. And you can ask questions in the feed. Okay, so processing. So, of course, pigs have a job, and pigs die so that we can have pork, and that means something, okay? And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. In local food, people are buying our virtue. They're buying our story that we do it better. And in many cases, we really do it a lot better. And those pigs, they have one bad day. And we need to honor the effort of the farmers, the sacrifice of the pigs, the time, talent, and treasure that the processors put into the product, okay, into making the pork, and the time, talent, and treasure that the farmer put into that pork. That means something. The work we do means something, okay? And I would urge you, instead of coming at this with the idea that government regulations are out to get me, that there are government regulations out there that actually help your business, help you run more efficiently. I work with people, you know, we work with a thought model that you've seen me do on some other live feeds around how our circumstances create our thoughts create our feelings create our actions, and our actions create results. Well, if you go into this feeling like the government is out to get me around Trichinella, you're never going to drive the business that you want to have, okay? And that's, if you go in with that sort of negativity. I just got off the phone with an author about this. You know, it's entirely possible to take all these food safety regulations and market-based requests around food and use it to drive business. And that's how I want you to approach Trichinella. Understand the regulations and use them to make your products better and your production more efficient. And I kid you not, it can drive profitability. That's what we're about here at Dirigo Food Safety. We're about profitable local food businesses, okay? So anyway, so at the at USDA processing, there are a couple of different ways we approach Trichinella. All right. In the Code of Federal Regulation, and I don't know the one offhand, Greg, if you're listening, I'm sure you can type it into the comments, but in the Code of Federal Regulation, there's a whole list of things, mostly retail cuts, that we don't have to control for trichina, okay, because people cook pork. I mean, historically, we cook pork because of trichinellosis, right? But this is, in fact, the salt-cured pig. And most people on the salt-cured pig, while you may be hot smoking, we love hot smoking, a lot of us are cold smoking, a lot of us are fermenting and dry curing. There is a whole set of documentation in the files, which if you go on the page and you look on the left-hand side, you can see discussions, videos, there's a search bar there, and then there are files. Go through those files and read them. We've posted a lot of really good information in there. One of the things that we have posted is the Trichinella compliance guideline that came out in 2016 from FSIS. And in that Trichinella compliance guideline, you can go through and you can see all the different ways that you can control and kill Trichinella. And there are only a couple of ways to do it. We cook to control Trichinella, so that's, you know, there's new Salmonella compliance guidelines, so it's the new Appendix A. All right, and that controls for trichinellosis. We can freeze. There is a table in there, I forget what page, I think page 13, but don't quote me on that, about how to freeze for trichinella, okay? And then we cure for trichinella. There's a whole table in there, especially for salumis, where it talks about how now you can go all the way down to a 2% salt solution and not use nitrates or nitrites, well, you wouldn't be using nitrites in that, to control for trichinella, okay? And so you gotta read and become familiar with that documentation, because if you are in USDA production, or you're in a state that holds to USDA production because you have state equivalency, that's the guidance that you need to be familiar with, okay? You cannot, by and large, label yourself out of Trichinella, but I will tell you, if you're making products that do not have a standard of identity and you want to sell them as not ready to eat, you can do that. If you sell pork as not ready to eat, you don't have to control for Trichinella. Now, I would urge you to consider that carefully and whether or not people are actually going to cook your food, because if they are going to eat it raw, you have to treat it as a ready-to-eat food, and FSIS will not care that it says not ready to eat on it, okay? So just be aware. In many, many cases, you know, we talked about listeria last week. In many cases, you cannot label yourself out of food safety hazards. So just remember that. Okay, so cooking, freezing, and curing. Those are the three ways we take care of trichinellosis, all right? And like I said, there's the guidance that's written in the files. Go read those, all right? And then if you have any questions, by all means, you know, post the questions and that sort of thing. So that's how we do Trichinella in USDA production. When you control for Trichinella in USDA production, you are also controlling for toxoplasmosis. You'll notice at the end of that guidance, there is a whole thing about toxoplasmosis. From a public health perspective, the incidence of toxoplasmosis is actually increasing. Public health practitioners are fairly worried about it. And we're not, and so FSIS, you know, we all talk to each other, and FSIS came out with this guidance. So that's kind of the gist of it. I'm going to wait for a few comments, then I'll go over some questions and some concerns that came up on some of the threads, but I want to give people a chance to ask questions if they have them. And if not, that's totally fine. I know this was kind of last minute, but we're, again, having snow day. Okay, so a couple of questions that came up on the threads. The first one, Trichinella is only passed in the infective stage in meat. Okay, and so that meat can be meat of a rodent, that can be meat of a baby piglet, and that can be meat of a processed pig. The reason we're having this conversation is because there was a reported incidence of, I want to say 9 people got sick out in California from a product called larb made from wild pork. Okay, now feral hogs are a known carrier of trichinosis, and if you're hunting hogs, everything that I said applies, and doubly so. If you are hunting bears, the bear trichinosis is resistant to freezing, so please don't think that you can freeze and get rid of your bear trichinella. You can only cook it, and you have to cook it hotter than you have to cook pork. And so if you are making what we call comminuted sausages, you're grinding bear meat and pork and back fat and that sort of thing to make bear sausage, treat that as a bear product and cook it. I would not in any way, shape, or form eat cured wild bear because of the risk of trichinella. So anyway, so what I was saying is that the wild pork product that this was, that caused this was as I understand it, it's raw pork that's marinated in an acid, and then that cures it, kind of like ceviche in fish, where you drop a white fish in lemon juice and add salt, and it's ceviche, and add your culture here. It's delicious. I love it. I'm probably the only food safety professional I know that eats ceviche, but that's really the using feral hogs for raw pork products is really, really challenging, and that's why people got sick. So adding an acid to pork does not kill trichinella. It kills salmonella, but it does not kill trichinella. That is not a known way we can control for trichinosis. Okay, so that's one question that has come up. Another question that has come up is around rodents and rodent feces and that sort of thing. Trichinella is not passed in rodent feces. I think I said this, but I want to reiterate it. Trichinella is not passed in rodent feces. Salmonella, on the other hand, is passed in rodent feces. And if you have a rodent problem and you have piglets with calf scours, look to that. Or not calf scours, piglet scours, sorry. It's late in the afternoon. So those are some of the other things that have come up. Testing. I'm going to hit on testing a little bit. We are in a complete conundrum around testing. The only acceptable test in the United States for trichinella is what's called the digestion test. Okay, and this is where a processor sends in a 1 to 5 gram sample of the diaphragm. So trichinella lives in the diaphragm of pigs mostly. And it is digested with an enzyme called pepsin, and then extracted, and then you stick it on a microscope and you count and see if you see any trichinella larvae. All right, it's really a fairly basic test. Anybody who has passed, like freshman level biology can probably do it. But here's the problem. We used to have a laboratory that did this. It was in Athens, Georgia. Go Bulldogs, my alma mater. And it was in Athens, Georgia. And producers used to be able to send their samples into Athens for testing. That Athens lab closed. Okay. The only available testing is in-house testing for people who are doing export. I have been working with Dr. Zhang at FSI, or is he? No, he's not at FSIS. It might be at Agriculture Research Service, trying to figure out this trichinella for small processors, because nothing would delight me more for me to be able to give you guys name and address of lab where you could send a sample of pork and then we wouldn't have to worry about it, because you would send a sample of pork in, it would be negative, and then if that hog is negative, we don't have to control for trichinella in our curing process, right? Not going to happen. It's absolutely not going to happen because there's no economic incentive to do that. The government does not have the money. There's no funding for anything in Agricultural Research Service, let alone a lab they've already closed. Okay. And then further, those of you who are producers should probably know that the Pork Board, your checkoff dollars, they are working with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and OIE, the Organisation Internationale Épizootique, which is the organization for animal diseases. It's a not-for-profit in Paris, to create what's called a compartment here in America around Trichinella and declare us a Trichinella-free compartment across the United States. But here's the catch. You will have to be PQA Plus certified. Okay, now I happen to believe in PQA Plus. I think it's a really good program. It is, however, a level of documentation that most pasture pig processors aren't used to, all right? But one of the reasons we have no good testing for Trichinella is all of the effort is going in to declare us for husbanded pigs that Trichinella is not reasonably likely to occur if you have good on-farm practices. And those good on-farm practices that I talked about are things like grain hygiene, not garbage feeding, veterinary client-patient relationships, okay? You need to know your veterinarian and work with them, and documented health records, okay? That's basically what you do back on the farm to, frankly, run an efficient farm. But so that's where this conversation is going. This conversation is not going to more and easier access to Trichinella testing. I spent a year working with a private lab trying to get that up and running, and it did not happen. Okay, it's not gonna happen. It may happen with toxoplasmosis, and if we can figure out a way to do testing for toxoplasmosis, and we can control for if we can test for toxoplasmosis, then we can say maybe Trichinella is not reasonably likely to occur. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm still working on it. Okay, so that's the future. People have put out that BioRad test. That is an antigen test that is not acceptable. It is not being exported to the United States anymore. It's manufactured in France. It is only used in France, or it's only used in the EU, and it's neither sensitive nor specific enough, it's called. So the negatives, we don't know really if they're negative, and the positives, we don't know if they're positive. It is not sensitive and specific enough, and the USDA does not accept it. You will hear, okay, that there were production companies that used it, okay? I don't have an explanation for that other than that sometimes the level of training of our USDA inspectors for small plants is not quite what we need it to be, all right? But that test is no longer available in America, and nobody's doing that anymore. Okay, so anyway, we are 2 minutes from the top of the hour. I am happy to take questions. Other than that, I will let you go. And I'm gonna go enjoy my snow day with my kids. And I'll give it a minute for testing for questions. And you know, we have a couple of minutes, so if there's anything else anybody has a question about, I'm happy to field questions on other things. So, all right. All right, doesn't look like we're going to get any more questions. So again, I'm Dr. Michelle Fanninsteel. I'm the food safety admin here at the Salt Cured Pig. I love all of you guys. I love the page. I love working with you. All right, if you have any questions, you can direct message me over Facebook. You can come find us on Facebook at Dirigo Food Safety. I'm at DirigoFoodSafety.com, obviously. And if you have any questions that you don't want to shoot over social media, you can email me. I'm Michelle, M-I-C-H-E-L-E, at DirigoFoodSafety.com. Thank you so much, everybody. You go out there and you make good pork products. Keep us all safe. Thanks. Have a great day.